Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. My wife and I bought our dream home 4 years ago. We'd scrimped and saved for years to afford it. A modest 3-bedroom in a well-maintained neighborhood with good schools and walking trails nearby. The HOA fees weren't cheap, but the neighborhood looked pristine, and we figured it was worth the cost. For the first 2 years, everything was fine. We paid our dues on time, kept our lawn mowed, and followed all the rules. The only real interaction we had with the HOA was getting approval to repaint our front door, boring beige to a slightly less boring tan. Real rebels, I know. The backyard was what really sold us on the house. It wasn't huge, but it had mature maple trees that gave perfect shade in the summer, and enough space for my wife's garden beds. She loves gardening. It's her therapy after long hours at the hospital where she works as a nurse. Our backyard backs up to a small community green space with a walking trail. When we first moved in, there was no easy way to get from our yard to the trail, except by walking all the way around the block. So I decided to build a garden path. I did everything by the book. I submitted detailed plans to the HOA Architectural Review Committee, including materials, natural stone pavers, dimensions, and even a drainage plan. After 2 months of back and forth and a $150 review fee, they finally approved it. The path cost me nearly $2,000 in materials, plus countless weekends of labor. I'm no professional landscaper, but I took my time and did it right. Proper grading, weed barrier underneath, rounded stones as borders to prevent erosion. My wife planted native wildflowers along both sides. It was beautiful, functional, and exactly what we'd envisioned. For about a year, life was good. We used the path almost daily, and neighbors often commented on how nice it looked. Some even asked for my design plans so they could build something similar. Then everything changed when the HOA board had its annual election. Out went the reasonable, rarely heard from board members, and in came what I can only describe as a power-hungry regime led by a retired couple with way too much time on their hands. I'll call them Mr. and Mrs. President. They'd moved from some exclusive gated community in Florida and immediately started talking about how our neighborhood needed to be brought up to standard. Their first order of business was raising the monthly fees by 30%. When homeowners complained at the board meeting, Mr. President just shrugged and said, "Quality costs money." Their second move was hiring a new management company that began sending out violation notices for the most trivial things. Garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, basketball hoops in driveways, bird feeders that weren't the approved design. I got my first notice for having unapproved landscaping in my backyard. I responded with a copy of the approval letter for my garden path, thinking it was just a mix-up with the new management company. They never responded, but the notices stopped, so I assumed everything was fine. I was wrong. One Tuesday afternoon in April, I came home from work early. As I pulled into my driveway, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery coming from my backyard. I sprinted around the side of the house to find a small bulldozer and 3 workers tearing up my garden path. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. The workers stopped, looking confused. One of them, wearing a fluorescent vest, approached me. "Sorry, sir. We're just following orders from the HOA. Got paperwork right here." He handed me a work order. I scanned it, my blood boiling. The document, signed by Mrs. President, authorized the removal of an unapproved and unsafe structure encroaching on community property at my address. "This is bullshit," I said, waving the approval letter I'd kept in my files. "My path was approved 2 years ago. You need to stop right now." The worker looked genuinely apologetic. "Look, man, we're just doing what we were paid to do. You need to take this up with your HOA. By this point, they'd already destroyed about half of the path. The carefully placed pavers were scattered, and my wife's wildflowers were crushed under the bulldozer's treads. I took out my phone and started taking pictures and videos of everything. The destruction, the workers, the work order, and my original approval letter. "I'm calling the police," I said. "This is destruction of private property." That finally got their attention. The workers huddled together, making phone calls of their own. Within minutes, a shiny black SUV pulled up, and out stepped Mr. and Mrs. President. "The problem," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "is that you're destroying my property without my permission." She gave me a condescending smile. "Actually, you're the one who's built an unauthorized structure that encroaches on community property. The board voted last month to have it removed." "I have approval from the previous board," I countered, showing her the letter. "This path is entirely on my property and I've done nothing wrong." Mr. President stepped forward. "The previous board made a mistake. Our survey shows your path extends 3 feet onto community property. Plus, it's a safety hazard. Someone could trip and sue the association." "That's ridiculous," I said. "I built this exactly according to the approved plans." "Well," Mrs. President said with a smirk, The board has the right to correct previous errors in judgment. It's in the bylaws. By this point, 2 police officers had arrived, responding to my call. After hearing both sides, they determined it was a civil matter and couldn't do much besides keep the peace. They advised me to contact a lawyer if I believed the HOA was overstepping. The officers left, and I was forced to watch as the workers finished destroying my path. Mrs. President stood there the whole time with a satisfied look on her face. Before leaving, she handed me a bill for $1,200 for the removal services. I was livid. As soon as they left, I called my wife to tell her what happened. She rushed home from work, and I've never seen her so upset. The garden she'd lovingly tended was trampled, and many of her plants were destroyed. That evening, we pored over our HOA documents, the approval letter, and our property survey from when we bought the house. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The path was entirely on our property, properly approved, and the HOA had no right to remove it. The next day, I took the day off work and visited a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. After reviewing my documents, she was confident we had a strong case. They've made several critical mistakes here, she explained. First, they destroyed approved improvements without proper notice or process. Second, they falsely claimed your path encroached on community property when your survey clearly shows it doesn't. And third, they billed you for their illegal actions. She advised me to send a formal demand letter requesting immediate reimbursement for the destroyed path, restoration of the area, and compensation for the damaged plants. If they refused, we would file a lawsuit. I sent the letter via certified mail, giving them 10 days to respond. 9 days later, I received a response from the HOA attorney dismissing my claims and reiterating that the board had the right to remove unsafe features regardless of previous approvals. It was time to escalate. We filed a lawsuit against the HOA for trespassing, destruction of property, breach of covenant, and acting in bad faith. The HOA attorney immediately tried to intimidate us into dropping the case, warning that if we lost, we'd be responsible for their legal fees under the HOA bylaws. My lawyer wasn't concerned. That clause works both ways, she said with a smile. When we win, they'll be paying ours. As the discovery process began, things got interesting. We requested all board meeting minutes, communications about our property, and the supposed survey they claimed showed our encroachment. Their responses were delayed, incomplete, and evasive. After my lawyer filed a motion to compel, the truth started coming out. There was no new survey. Mr. President had simply eyeballed it and decided our path was too close to community property. The board had never formally voted on removing our path. Mrs. President had made the decision unilaterally. And most damning of all, we discovered emails where Mrs. President complained that our path was encouraging renters from the apartments down the street to cut through our neighborhood, and that it reduced the exclusive feel of the community. In other words, it had nothing to do with safety or encroachment. They just didn't like that our path made the neighborhood more accessible to people they considered undesirable. During depositions, Mrs. President's facade finally cracked. When confronted with her emails, she became defensive and contradicted her previous statements multiple times. Mr. President tried to claim ignorance, saying he trusted his wife to handle the minor landscaping issues. The other board members admitted they hadn't been properly consulted and had no idea our path had been previously approved. As our court date approached, their attorney suggested mediation. They offered to pay $3,000 for the damage, not even enough to rebuild the path, let alone compensate us for the stress and destroyed plants. We declined. 2 days before the scheduled trial, they came back with a significantly improved offer. $15,000 to cover all damages, plus our legal fees and a written apology. My lawyer advised that this was a reasonable settlement, but ultimately it was our decision. After discussing it with my wife, we decided to push forward with the trial. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about holding them accountable and making sure they couldn't do this to other homeowners. The trial lasted 3 days. Our attorney methodically presented the evidence, the original approval, the property survey, the photographs of the destruction, and the damning emails revealing the board's true motives. The HOA attorney tried to argue technicalities about the board's right to revoke previous approvals, but the judge wasn't buying it. In his ruling, the judge didn't hold back. He found the HOA had acted in bad faith, abused their authority, and willfully destroyed property they had no right to touch. He ordered them to pay $28,500 in damages, the cost to professionally restore the path, replace the plants, and compensate us for emotional distress, plus all our legal fees, which by that point had reached nearly $22,000. But he didn't stop there. Finding that the board had violated their fiduciary duty to homeowners, he ordered a forensic audit of the HOA finances for the past year and appointed a neutral third party to oversee the next board election. The fallout was swift. The audit revealed several questionable financial decisions, including the board paying themselves consultation fees that weren't authorized in the bylaws. Mr. and Mrs. President resigned rather than face removal proceedings. The management company was replaced. In the special election that followed, a new board was formed with a commitment to transparency and fairness. Their first official act was to revise the architectural review process to prevent arbitrary reversals of approved projects. As for us, we used the settlement money to rebuild our garden path, this time with upgraded materials and professional installation. My wife expanded her garden, planting even more wildflowers than before. We installed a small bench at the entrance to the path with a discreet plaque that reads, "Persistence pays off." The new board even asked if they could use photos of our restored path in the community newsletter as an example of the kind of thoughtful landscaping they wanted to encourage. Looking back, I'm still amazed at how something as simple as a garden path could lead to such drama. But I'm glad we stood our ground. Sometimes you have to fight back against bullies, even when they come disguised as authority figures with clipboards and bylaws. Oh, and those renters from the apartments that Mrs. President was so worried about. They're mostly young families and seniors who now regularly use our neighborhood walking trails. Some have even become friends, stopping to admire my wife's garden and chat when they pass by. Turns out a more accessible, welcoming community hasn't reduced property values at all. Quite the opposite. Houses in our neighborhood now sell faster and for higher prices than similar homes in nearby HOA communities. I guess the exclusive feel Mrs. President wanted wasn't so valuable after all. Update: 6 months later. It's been just over 6 months since the court ruling against our HOA, and I thought you all might appreciate an update on how things have developed. First, the financial impact on the HOA was even more significant than we initially understood. After the forensic audit revealed the unauthorized consultation fees the previous board had been paying themselves, they were ordered to repay all of that money, nearly $45,000, back into the HOA accounts. This, combined with our settlement and legal fees, depleted most of the HOA reserve fund. As a result, there was serious discussion about whether to impose a special assessment on all homeowners to replenish the reserves. This caused quite an uproar in the community, as you can imagine. Many people were angry that they might have to pay for the previous board's misconduct. During this turmoil, something unexpected happened. My wife and I received letters, emails, and even home-baked goods from neighbors thanking us for standing up to the old board. Apparently, we weren't the only ones who had suffered under their regime, just the only ones who fought back successfully. One elderly couple told us how they'd been fined repeatedly for their grandson's basketball hoop, despite having medical documentation that basketball was part of his physical therapy. A single mom described getting violation notices about her holiday decorations being up too long when she was actually working double shifts just to make ends meet. The stories kept coming, each more frustrating than the last. At the next community meeting, when the special assessment was being discussed, I spoke up with a suggestion. Instead of making everyone pay for the previous board's mistakes, why not pursue legal action against the former board members' homeowners' insurance policies? Most homeowners' policies include coverage for serving on nonprofit boards, specifically to protect against this kind of situation. The new board consulted their attorney, who confirmed this was a viable approach. They filed claims against the insurance policies of all 5 former board members. After some back and forth, the insurance companies ultimately settled, covering about 80% of the depleted reserve funds. The HOA still needed a small special assessment, but it was much more manageable, $150 per household instead of the originally proposed $750. As for Mr. and Mrs. President, they put their house on the market almost immediately after resigning from the board. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were having trouble selling. Apparently, potential buyers kept hearing about the lawsuit and getting spooked. They finally sold for well below asking price and moved to another gated community across town. I almost feel sorry for their new neighbors. The new board has been a breath of fresh air. They've revised numerous outdated or overly restrictive rules, implemented a more transparent financial reporting system, and created a community mediation process for disputes before they escalate to fines or legal action. Most significantly for us, they've established clear guidelines about previously approved improvements. Once something is approved, that approval can't be revoked unless there's a genuine safety issue or a material change in circumstances. And any such revocation requires due process, including proper notice and an opportunity for the homeowner to address the concerns. Our rebuilt garden path has become something of a neighborhood attraction. We've added solar-powered lights along the edges that come on at dusk, making it usable and safe even after dark. My wife's expanded wildflower garden has attracted butterflies and hummingbirds, and she started a small neighborhood gardening club that meets monthly. The new board actually approached us recently about the possibility of adding similar paths at strategic points around the neighborhood to improve connectivity to the walking trails. They asked if I would be willing to consult on the design and implementation. I agreed on the condition that we incorporate native plants and pollinator-friendly landscaping around all the new paths. As for our legal team, they've received referrals from several other homeowners in nearby communities facing similar HOA overreach. Our case has apparently become something of a template for holding rogue boards accountable. The most satisfying development, however, has been the change in our community's atmosphere. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other before are now connecting at community events, helping each other with projects, and looking out for one another. The petty rule enforcement that used to dominate HOA communications has been replaced by newsletters highlighting community achievements and opportunities for involvement. Last month, we hosted a neighborhood barbecue in our backyard. As I watched people from all parts of the community, including those apartment renters Mrs. President had been so worried about, enjoying themselves and connecting with each other, I realized something important. Standing up to the HOA wasn't just about our garden path or even about justice for us personally. It was about what kind of community we wanted to live in. We chose a community where people can express their individuality within reasonable guidelines, where rules exist to maintain a pleasant living environment rather than to control and exclude, and where neighbors look out for each other. Sometimes it takes someone willing to push back against overreach to remind everyone what really matters. In our case, it took a bulldozed garden path to build stronger connections throughout the entire neighborhood. And that bench we installed with the Persistence Pays Off plaque? We've added a second one on the opposite side of the path. This one reads, "A path is more than a way from here to there. It's a connection." I think that says it all. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My first job out of college was for a local TV station. The owner was, and still is, the worst human being I've ever met. This guy has money, but he will cheat and lie, anything to get out of paying his bills. When I started working there, the owner had just signed a contract with DirecTV to become part of their broadcast package. Since they were at the time purely a local TV station, this meant that we had about 2 months to upgrade our system so that we can start broadcasting to DirecTV customers in the entire Bay Area. Every day that we failed to do this past the deadline means that the owner would suffer a penalty per the contract. Not knowing about how any of this works, the owner hired a friend of mine to come in as a freelance consultant. My friend told him that for about $15,000 he can get a system that will automate the entire process, which of course this guy didn't want to pay. He tasked my friend with finding a cheaper way, around half, and to pay for all the hardware up front and get reimbursed later. Knowing what a piece of crap this guy is, I warned my friend not to front the money because he wouldn't get paid back. The guy just smiled and said, "Watch me." So we made it work, we went live on schedule, and the owner was happy. Then my friend went in and presented the guy with the bill. Immediately, the usual excuses starts, "Oh, I'm a little short this month, can I pay you later?" etc., etc. Then my friend pulled out the trump card. Not only did my friend threaten to take all the equipments back and takes the station off the air, he reveals that in order to get the uplink working for cheap, someone had to come in every day and code the broadcast manually. It's not a terribly complicated procedure, takes less than 5 mins, but of course no one else at the station knows how to do it but him. So either the owner can pay him what he's owed, plus a $2,000 a month consulting fee, or the station goes dark and he starts paying the penalty to DirecTV. The fucker paid fast. So instead of $15,000, he ended up shelling out more than double that amount as my friend lapped up his $2,000 a month fee for close to a year before he felt bad and finally teach someone there how to do it. The next one is a malicious compliances story. About 2 months ago, I worked for an absolute tyrant of an administrator. Dude was terrible. Terrible enough to warrant me writing in the apparent point of view of a 48-year-old teacher wishing he was Sigma. But I digress. Before working for this school, I was teaching 8th grade math, 4th grade math, or being an academic coach for the previous 18 or so years. I switched school primarily due to location. I found a school on the other side of the mountain I stare at nightly and figured it was a good match. Nope. This admin, we'll call him Poppin' Fresh, shut me down every step of the way. I entered the school middle of the school year with very rough kids, and my first day training the academic coach for the school and district trained us up on this math/ELA/anything-you-want gaming program called GimKit. I understand that GimKit isn't education in and of itself. It's simply a 5-minute tool to find out if kids know the content, and it engages the kids greatly. My first day with students, I saw their terrible behaviors. They ran 2 other teachers out of there, evidently. So I decided it was going to take a little bit of grace to get them to listen to me. I showed them GimKit. They had popped open their Chromebooks for no more than 30 seconds when TA, terrible admin, Pop, and Fresh came in and shut it down instantly. He never assesses the situation. He just sees kids on hokey-looking activities as he literally pops in the classroom, bouncing around like he's on something. Anyway, this happened all the time. I would instruct for no more than 8 minutes tops, and walk around and help them with concepts the best I could. I would be walking around, he would pop in and tell me to change something, like clockwork. Every program or strategy or center-based activity I try to use to get the 7th graders motivated gets shut down instantly. And he finally says out loud, "Teach only what's on the tests. Nothing more." Bet. I took this as an opportunity to enter some MC with a side of, I can't believe I'm here. I start going by the book 100%. Anytime a student asks, why do we do it like this? When we are working on surface area and volume, I only say, that's not on the test. Anytime I, naturally, find an urge to find a connection to other standards, I stop myself. It's not on the test. Over a short amount of time, students are frustrated and sitting there yawning. It pains me greatly, so I decide to only apply my MC when good old Pop and Fresh pops his way back into my classroom. He finally pops in with his boss's boss, and a couple of people I've never seen before. I instantly switch from my going deeper, thinking outside the box, activity-based learning to exactly what he wants, teaching only what's on the test. I instantly turn into Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and the kids instantly groan, saying, "Mr. Opie, I hate when you teach us like this." Comments from the students fly about the room. "This is the worst part of my day. I hate math now, thanks." And many much more colorful, expletive-laden commentary. Frank Caliendo even popped in for a spell. "Now here's a guy who doesn't know how to motivate students." Boom! Pop and Fresh even doubled down on his usual banter, putting on a show for his crew of bosses. "These kids seem highly unmotivated, OP. We need to meet about this if you can't get them engaged." I interjected, "You said to only teach what's on the test, so that's what I'm doing. Only what's on the test, right? Like if they wanted to know why this happens or that happens or how to solve this a different way, that's not on the test, right? You told me just to be up and be teaching and never have them on their Chromebooks, right?" I said this to him, in definite earshot of his accompanying party, mainly because I had a feeling these were the head honchos. The ones who signed off on spending all that money to make our school a true one-to-one school. A school where every student has a Chromebook. Not utilizing the Chromebooks is something I knew that was something Pop and Fresh believed in, but I had a feeling that the district would want the kids properly utilizing them. He answered back to me, "I only stopped you from using the Chromebooks because the kids were all just playing games." The students interject, then, "It's a math game." The head honcho moved to Interjection City. "Well, let's see what this math game is all about." I had the kids get their Chromebooks. They all excitedly logged on. I pulled up a surface area and volume GimKit, and the kids were feverishly playing the game using pencils and notebooks to solve the problems needed to be answered to gain ammunition in their game. It was active. It was fun for all. I paused the game when needed to show different ways to isolate the variable when solving surface area problems, especially of spheres and cones, etc. It was what education was supposed to be. Pop and Fresh ran out of pop, and by the end of the day I received an email from the head honcho himself asking me about him and how things were going. I was honest with him. I told him about his assaults, threats of assaults, and hiding assaults. All things that I'm sure would be an interesting part of this tale, but they aren't related to the MC inherent here. It's also an ongoing investigation, even 2 months later as I'm teaching at a new school on the other side of the proverbial mountain. Pop and Fresh is under investigation for what he's been doing to me and other new teachers, to the school. And it's crawling all the way up the chain. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.